The Game of Zen explores the often overlooked ways in which professional, personal, and spiritual growth are interrelated. We dive deep into the life teachings of the Buddha and the mindfulness practices of Zen, revealing how they can help us dramatically expand our possibilities for wholehearted work, life, and play.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Game of Zen podcast. My name is Scott Berman, checking in here from Philadelphia, PA. And as always, I'm joined by my good buddy Paul out in Boulder. What's new and exciting, Paul?
Hey, Scott, it's good to see you again. It's been a little while since we've come together, but I am enjoying life. We've got a beautiful Colorado fall going. Leaves are falling. We're getting the crisp weather coming in. So things are good. How about you in Philly?
You know, the fall weather is great. And this morning I was raking a bunch of leaves and I realized that I raked the leaves like 2 days ago. And so, yeah, we're in that time of year where they're coming down, but the weather's beautiful here. I love this time of year out here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We are going to do part 2 of our discussion on psychedelics today. So a few months back, we did a little session on that, and we talked about how we got into psychedelics and what they meant and how it blends in with a lot of the work we're doing with mindfulness and Zen Buddhism. So we thought it was a good time to revisit the topic, talk about what's new and different in our lives and also in the news. So Paul, I know you've been doing a lot of work lately with different folks and doing more research. What's new with you in the psychedelic world?
Well, I would say that I've become just more and more confirmed about the value of a real conscientious and intentional use of psychedelics in life. I've done, and also I guess I would say that I think it's become more simple for me. Like you could say the value proposition or the benefit, it's become clearer and simpler. You know exactly what's being supported with the use of psychedelics. So that's kind of been my evolution over the last few months. I've been personally microdosing pretty extensively on my own intuitive protocol for the last few months and got a lot of good learnings from that. And I've led a few and also engaged in a few macrodose experiences that I've have some good, I think, clarity and feeling for the benefits, of the medicine in our lives. So it's been a good, a good season of growth with this modality.
So I want to ask you about both macro and microdosing, but let's start with the micro. And this is the question I get asked a lot. Like, why should I do it? What does it do for me? How do I know it's working? How long does it take to start having an effect? And is this the right thing? So how would you answer those questions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it actually is somewhat difficult to answer. We were talking before the episode about, well, how do we communicate the benefits, which are very clear. I mean, it's very clear what they are. They're very substantial, but it's hard sometimes to talk about, and certainly very hard to quantify. And I was reflecting that it's very similar to meditation. Doing meditation, you can feel things right at the beginning. You can feel things deepening, over time if you maintain the practice. But it's subtle. The benefits you get from meditation are subtle. They can sometimes be somewhat dramatic, actually, but for the most part, they're subtle. So it's kind of like a pool of water that's slowly coming up from an aquifer and filling, and it just over time it fills until you have this great beautiful quality of presence. And with these type of processes that grow so subtly, it's kind of easy to drop off because you could forget. You don't realize that your everyday consistent practice is reinforcing that subtle capacity that you're generating. You don't quite feel the connection between those things. and you can stop, and then things start to fade, and then you almost don't even notice them fading. So meditation is definitely like that. I mean, probably a lot of our listeners have maybe tried a meditation practice, and even if they did feel something, they may have dropped off because it wasn't like the hit you get on most of our practices and stimulations, right? We get the immediate benefit. So I'm pretty clear, and I will say I've also been working with several other Zen teachers, so longtime meditators, decades long meditators who've done deep study of their minds, extensive practice of experiencing their own minds, and they are very positive on microdosing for their lives. Um, and so I'll share about that, because I find the same thing is maintaining what I find from a psilocybin microdosing protocol is an actual experience of the texture of my mind in process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very rich environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's embodied. I can almost feel thoughts in a way. I can negotiate thoughts. I'm much more grounded in my mind. There's a stability of mind that the plant medicine is actually providing
Mm-hmm.
by bringing it alive. So there's the groundedness and stability. There's a capacity that it supports. So
Mm-hmm.
you're able to hold, I find myself able to just hold more things in my mind, and I can in effect put some things in the front of my mind. I can put some things in the back of my mind. I can hold them in different, places within, say, the house of my mind,
Yeah,
without
the monkey
getting,
mind.
without the mind can be capacious like that, but it's when you're running from room to room, or you're shining a spotlight, all over the place in the dark. That's the monkey mind. But when your house is illuminated and you just say, well, I'm just going to put that in that room, and I'm not freaking out because I could just walk up the stairs and check that out whenever I want. Your emotional disposition is completely different, which in turn reinforces the spaciousness of your mind. So those are two things: stability, capacity, and then I would say there's a quality of insight. And this is
Mm-hmm.
another very subtle thing, and it's difficult to talk about and almost impossible to quantify. But I find myself with a kind of a clarity and a depth um, that the medicine supports, that I can stay with a topic, a person, a word, an idea, an experience, a state. And this is exactly what you get from meditation.
Mm-hmm.
It's also supported by this medicine to stay with it, and to, you could say it supports deep listening in a way. So that
Mm-hmm.
deep listening means that more information is coming in. And from that information, you now have a greater context to make creative leaps and connections and have insight into what's going on. So there's that insightful, creative aspect on top of the stability and the capacity.
That was a fantastic answer, Paul. And I like you worked in two great analogies. Like one was the water filling up and little by little. And the second one, when you go, I like when you talked about going room to room and figuring out what's going on in that room. So I love the analogies. And I do love the overlap between meditation and psychedelics. And I think that the other thing is that it does over time build on it. You talked about many people who sort of drift away from one or the other of those things. The opposite is true too, that if you stay with both of them, if you have a dedicated meditation practice, then it gets stronger and better over time. Same thing with microdosing. If you stick with it and you kind of like work with it and think about it a lot, it does get better over time. And then you start to, the questions that I asked you earlier are more apparent over time. Like I now know more about what it's doing for me than I did when I first started. I had the same questions, like, is this even working? Why am I doing this? And then now I'm like, oh yeah, it's definitely working. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when I know you've recommended this to a lot of the people that you work with and worked it into some of your groups, and some people sort of go with it and love it and some people don't. So Why do you think that is, and how do you, dedicate yourself to working with it and staying consistent?
Yeah, it speaks to the subtlety of the practice. And I'll say I was the same way, and I have been the same way. I've taken it for a period, microdosed for a period and really appreciated it and really liked it. And then I'll kind of fall off, and I'll forget. And I've gone months without microdosing. And then I almost have to remind myself, oh, I have an
Yeah,
ally here. I actually
yeah,
have support here. And when I jump back in, I'm immediately grateful that I did, because it's there. So I would say that, most people are like me in that way, is that you almost kind of forget, or you lose your awareness of the subtle support that you're getting, and it's easy to fall off. So the recommendation would be to maintain a sadhana, that, if you know that word, it's like a practice, it's a spiritual practice basically,
hmm
but
hmm
it's a habit, or a protocol, or a sadhana of caring for your mind in this way with this
yeah.
medicine. And following a certain protocol. It could be one of in the big beginning stages. I do recommend you follow like an established protocol, 1 day on, 2 days off, 3 days
hmm
on, 1 day off, whatever it may be, just so you've got a baseline of a consistency, so you can recognize, how the medicine is supporting you. But at a certain point, and it might come very quickly, I've gone to just an intuitive use. uh,
hmm
so
Right.
I'll just wake up in the day, and I'll decide every morning, whether I want it.
Yes.
But the key is to maintain it as a serious part of your sadhana, of your
Yeah.
self development practice, and your self support. And if you do that, I believe you'll see a lot of dividends.
I agree. And I want to come back to the point of like the neuroplasticity. And I've tried to, I've done a bunch of research, and I always recommend to any of our listeners, do your own research, learn about this, be careful, go slowly, and all that. And the neuroplasticity is so fascinating because psilocybin does build connections in your brain. But thoughts are going quicker from room to room, as you said. And I believe meditation does a very similar thing too. When you have a good meditation and mindfulness practice, I believe that the thoughts are more, they're more under control than they might have been before. So it's so interesting what's happening with the plant, but also it's like your brain is like a muscle. You're exercising your brain with both things, and it's helping you grow as a person, right? So don't you think also over time, if you have like a couple years of it, that you become somehow like a little bit different person from this too?
Definitely. Yeah. And the neurological studies,
Yeah,
are proving that certain, networks get ignited, on the mushrooms, that then can be integrated
yeah.
into, you could say, into your default mode network, into the standard kind of operating system of the brain.
I think we're going to learn a lot of interesting things in the next 5 to 10 years about these substances and what they do. I have this weird theory, and I have absolutely zero proof of this, but I think when you think about Alzheimer's and dementia and Lewy bodies, these brain diseases that are so tough to watch, I feel like somehow the neuroplasticity that you get from the plant medicine, and maybe meditation too, might slow that down. I've read some articles about it, and we obviously need to more clinical research. But putting that aside, we do know that it works extremely well for depression and PTSD and CTE and things like that. And so I think that I'm encouraged that we're actually studying this more, because I do think that over time we're going to learn a lot more of the benefits.
Yeah, it's very much the case. And there's a lot of good work being done, in the clinical applications of the psychedelics. You and I aren't in that world so much, right? We're wanting it for opening up our capacities.
Yeah.
There's always healing dimensions that go along with our holing dimensions. Um, to expand capacity and integration, alignment, integrity, performance. You could say all of those things go along with that, and those things are not as quantifiable, right?
Right.
They don't have those sort of clinical markers of success or failure. There's something of a cure paradigm in the clinical dimensions. And this is more of a care paradigm when we're talking about, say, microdosing for care of the mind, care of the body mind, and in the interests of holing and healing and increasing integration and capacity. So, yes to all of that. And also just a note, like, I don't think, anybody should be waiting for some sort of clinical studies to prove, people have been meditating for millennia.
Yeah.
Because we know as practitioners, we know it works. We know it experientially. And it's only in the last 20 years that there are, scientific markers for how it's working and what it's doing. But, I'm glad I didn't wait for any studies like that to engage in meditation. And I feel the same way about, conscientious use of psychedelics.
Totally agree. We can't wait. But it would be helpful, but it's also not necessary. I don't need to see a report, exactly. I'd like to, but I don't need to, in other words. But I wanted to actually ask you about your coaching business and just how this plays into it, because I think it's interesting, and it's two parts. So first of all, how do you, if you work with someone and you're doing your regular coaching and then you get them into the microdosing, how does that change and how does that work? But also the second part is, you as a coach, how's your psilocybin use and microdosing changed your approach to how you coach people?
Yeah. So really, there's not a dramatic difference with the psilocybin use because my coaching is mindfulness meditation based. It's Zen mind based, you could say. So it's about basing, your activity in the world, in your life, in your work, from this place of a cultivated, stable, equanimous, focused mind. The psilocybin is just another way to cultivate that. So there isn't any really dramatic differences, other than, I can help people follow a protocol of microdosing that then I check in with them on, well, what are you noticing in terms of your capacity? What are you experiencing in terms of the effects of your, I call them foundational practices. So, I consider the microdosing and meditation to be foundational practices, together with self-care, exercise, diet. It goes along with those. So in my coaching, each week I'll check in right at the beginning. How are your foundational practices going? Okay. And sometimes they've been good and sometimes bad. They've been consistent. They've fallen off the wagon. They've been traveling. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I just help keep them on track with respect to those foundational practices. Then we put that aside. And then we look at the matter at hand, how they're being activated in their executive positions. What are the challenges that are coming up in their entrepreneurial business, whatever those are. And then we meet those with, a consciousness of, whatever the coaching material is, whatever place they're at. But we've got that quality of mind that we, that I can help them bring to those situations, because they, we have these habits of mind. We go into reactive patterns. We have, blind spots. We have things we think are untrue, or things we think are true that aren't true, right? Because of a lack of wisdom or lack of insight. So me as a coach, I'm able to say, oh, well, let's look at it this way. And now they're actually realizing that I'm helping them to activate their mind of meditation, their Zen mind, in order to look at it that way. And so they can immediately see, oh, okay, aha. So that's kind of how I'm working with people. And in a sense, it's the same answer for how I'm doing it with myself. I just use it as a foundational practice to be fully present with what I'm facing.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think, and I also just wanted to say, we've talked all about psilocybin here mostly today. There are plenty of other things that are happening that are interesting with MDMA and ketamine, and LSD and things like that. So it's not just about, we focus on psilocybin because I think that's got some of the most benefits here. And, it's natural and things like that. But there are a lot of other modalities, and I think that let's talk a little bit about how society is looking at this now differently. It seems to be a lot more acceptable. Like when you bring it up with people, it's not such a crazy idea now. All right, and more people are saying, yeah, I think I can work this in as one of my modalities.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case more and more. The stigma is off. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding. There's even probably too much hype in some areas. So the big psychedelic renaissance has produced a bunch of hype, which isn't good. And there's some, untrained and inexperienced, people who are getting into guiding. So there's some excesses. And there's still a lot of misunderstandings, I think, about it. But I believe, the general trend of the culture is to be open, to this type of support. And I feel that's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. And we just need to get more people into it, I think. But not everybody. It's not for everybody. But I think the more people that try it, first of all, that's where microdosing actually becomes a much bigger deal, because a lot of people are like saying to me, well, I don't want to I'm like, no, you're going to be fine. Just this is very small. This is 100 milligrams. You're not barely going to feel it, but over time it's going to work. So, it's sort of getting the word across to people that you can do this at low doses and it does help you, and you will maintain self-control. And, it's interesting. But you said something earlier too about testing on yourself and learning, the protocols. There's a lot of advice out there, but really the best way is for you just to figure out your own best path, right?
It is, I've come to see it as developing a relationship with the medicine.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit off of our allopathic paradigm, right? It's like, here's the prescription,
right,
here's the dosage that you're supposed to take. And we're told that by our medical experts, right? And obviously there's lots and lots of pharmaceuticals that applies to. And really you should be developing a relationship even with those. But it's very much the case with these entheogens, these organic compounds, plant medicine, that we're taking in, that we're really well served by developing a relationship, a personal relationship with the medicine. So that means starting with a protocol that, an informed source like myself, may give you and guide you through, but with the intention of developing your own relationship with it, so that you can use it as almost a part of your diet, right?
Yes.
Where you're making the decisions around what you eat and how much and when, and the types and different varieties and situations, right? It becomes a very living ally in your life.
I put it in the same category as the gym and mindfulness and Pilates and hiking. And then there's psilocybin, and then there's meditation. These are all things that I do on a weekly basis to stay in good shape mentally and physically. And so, and there's so many more times now when I say, I think that this might be a good time for a little psilocybin right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's so interesting over time. It's very carefully gotten into it, but I'm like, I think today, right now would be a good time. And it's never, for me personally, it's never a bad thing. It's always a positive experience. And I think then I also just want to take it back to the meditation side of things, because that's also something that's always a good experience. And then the more that I just work it into my routine, the better my day goes. So there's certain days when I don't have time and I don't do a good meditation session. And then I'll go a couple days with no psilocybin, and then I'll okay, I need to sit down, take a deep breath, and have a good meditation, and go take a hike with some mushrooms, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, okay, that was a good afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm sort of conditioning myself and getting used to the benefits of it, which sort of build, and I think that's helped.
Yeah, and this also gets at the intention too, right? Yeah. I mean, we are talking about doing it situationally, but really we're talking about doing it intentionally. because I don't recommend really recreational use. I'm not, a fan of that. I did that a little bit in my 20s, but I'm very much about intentional, in
Yeah.
purpose, in service, use of, these powerful plant medicines. And so to have that kind of, intention, I guess that the thing I wanted to add was the kind of respect and intimacy, of using, plant medicine like this. We should be aware and conscious of everything we take into our bodies, right? Our
Yes.
bodies are a temple, and our minds are these amazing, alive, um, you can't even say what it is. It's us.
Yeah.
It's our quality of being
Yeah.
that's being affected. So we should be very conscious of the things we take in: stimulants, caffeine,
Yeah.
food, and the way it's affecting us, right? So these are powerful, albeit subtle,
Yeah.
if you're taking them at the microdose level. So to be very, very respectful that we're taking something in that's going to be a strong ally, but we have the intention of kind of working with it, and not just saying, help me out here. I'm just taking a pill to give
Yeah.
myself a better experience, but just say, I'm asking for your help to do good in the world.
I also think that it's really important to have the other part of it, which is working on yourself with, the meditation, mindfulness, therapy, Zen teacher, all that other stuff to work on your brain and your thoughts. When you combine that with the psychedelics, then it's really powerful. But if you don't have that other part of it, it could not be great. You really got to just sort, because a lot of things, sometimes things go, flying through your head about life or whatever, but to keep it all in perspective. And this has also come back to having like a good teacher and having a guide. So I think it's really cool that what you're doing, where you're getting people and, doing these sessions with them and speaking to them and guiding them. I think that kind of model that you've been working on is going to be more and more valuable over time and more popular.
Yeah, I have, as you know, Scott, my 3 contracts framework, which, we express discernment around the areas of work, life, and self, and establish what your commitments are in that area, in those areas. And that gives you the overall context of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then to do something like psychoactive use or even meditation, and it's within the framework of that intention set, is essential, actually. So now you're not, you're less prone to a bad trip or a whole bunch of confusion or that, right? So you create a safe container that is within the intentional context of what you're doing in your life. And that's where these medicines just have a lot of power.
Yeah, and these are also ancient medicines too. I mean, this isn't something new that was just cooked up in a pharma lab. This plant medicine that we were talking about, even ayahuasca and DMT and things like that, toad venom, there's a lot of things out there that have been around for a long, long time, and ancient civilizations use them for various purposes. I imagine in the early days of Buddhism and the movement there, that somehow along the way there was some plant medicine involved. I don't know, but I'm sure, right?
There are some theories about that. I don't know the details, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we know that this is involved with the movie making in Hollywood and, business executives. And so there's a lot of, over the years, there's a lot of creative, interesting people that have used psychedelics very effectively for their work or their life. And I think the more that we learn from them, the more we can apply it to ourselves and other people.
Yeah, definitely so. And this is where the simplification for me comes in, is that it's pretty important just to maintain the simple contexts, with which these things are used. And in all of the traditional environments that you just referenced right there, and theogenic use, plant medicine use, it's always in a ritual or ceremonial context. And there usually is a leader, and it's often done communally. So those big experiences are within the context of a certain community intention and a certain understanding of what our our relational beings are all about.
Yeah.
Really what it means to be human in relation with self, cosmos, other people, nature. Okay.
Nature, the universe.
Nature. Yeah, exactly. So there's a context of all that stuff, and the medicines are used ceremonially and ritually within that context. We don't have those contexts anymore. We don't have well understood, you could say, cosmic, spiritual, metaphysical paradigms, for our life. So the usage is being done in these different paradigms, whether it's a therapeutic paradigm or a connecting paradigm, a relationally enhancing paradigm. I talked about these in our first episode on psychedelics, waking up, growing up, showing up. So that's what we have, is we do have these different paradigms, but the important thing is to maintain the consciousness around the relational space that we're creating, the intention that's created, the safety that's created within those environments. There does need to be a certain conscientiousness of guardianship around the usage of it, because and now we're kind of migrating a little bit into macrodose experiences, which is a bit different from microdose. It's kind of interesting. I'm not even sure whether those traditional cultures did engage in microdose usage.
Probably not.
Of these plant medicines. Probably not, but maybe they did. But I feel like the way that our culture is generating that practice, has a lot of promise and not too many risks to it, I would say. I just want, put an asterisk on that, but I think there's a lot safe. When we get into the macrodose, there's the potential for very powerful breakthroughs and insights and healing, but there's also the potential for going off the rails, bad experiences, unsafe experiences, and possibly even, augmentation of deleterious, mental afflictive states. So as we get and talk about those, we do need to talk about really safe and secure frameworks, really informed guides, a really good, people with a really good understanding of the relational context that's being created, and an understanding that when we're opening ourselves up to these cosmic experiences with the big macrodose, dosages, we're getting contact with realms that, can have real negative kind of dimensions to them, or forces. We find ourselves connected in big mind, right? So we actually find that our mind and our self is much bigger than we thought it was. That's the primary insight of a psychedelic experience, is that it's way bigger and way different and way more multidimensional and way more layered than we think is our minds. That's the primary experience. So now how do we navigate that? What do we do with that? And there are some counter forces and negative forces that can come into play without the proper intention setting and protectorship around the experience.
Really important answer, Paul. Very, very great, because it is big, and you can't really explain it. You have to experience it to really understand how it changes you, and it is bigger than you think sometimes. So you have to always be careful. But I want to actually kind of shift to the future a little bit, because I think what's exciting is that there is a lot more information. There's more people like you out there that are being guides and teaching people. There's more. It's more accessible than ever. Now, I also think it's never going to be like a commercially available thing like cannabis. You're not going to have a dispensary that sells mushrooms. I don't believe. I think it's more going to happen through clinical, like pharma, where your doctor's going to say, instead of Xanax, I'm going to give you this pill called whatever, that's got psilocybin in it. And I think that once we get past the clinical trial stage, that could be a game changer. There's definitely, from an investment thesis, actually, in the psychedelic space, there's a lot of money being put into the biotech part of this business of developing actual medications that include these medicines that are game changers and can take a lot of market share away from pharma. That's really interesting, but I think we still got a long way to go. So where do you see the next couple of years going in terms of the development of these medicines and their integration?
Well, it probably goes in that direction, the way you said. Um, I'm not really the one to ask. I'll tell you where I'd like it to go.
Yeah, sure.
What a real big, cautionary flag up for me is the over commercialization and the over clinicalization, primarily the over commercialization, of these medicines. And so to create formulations that then become very expensive drugs for people it would be a terrible byproduct of this.
Right.
But as people are trying to develop those, they're also doing the clinical studies that are going to give some approval for the usage of them. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that the clinical regulatory process is going to yield some really interesting insights that are going to prove some really good drugs that are probably going to be over commercialized, but hopefully will also have the byproduct of allowing them to be used in more less kind of therapeutic or less clinical, you could say, settings, right?
Yeah.
So even right now, just to be able to work with someone like me to do a microdose course and to have macrodose experiences and have that available where the medicine itself is not expensive, which it isn't, right now, and to allow that to happen, that's where I hope this goes, where there's an acceptance, an understanding, and not an over commercialization, of these modalities.
Yeah, and obviously politics plays a role in this, and it's very interesting time. You live in a state, Colorado, that's a lot more permissive than Pennsylvania for this stuff. We're still trying to get around to recreational cannabis, but psilocybin is interesting because it's actually on the ballot in the election coming up in Massachusetts. Actually, they want to decriminalize mushrooms there. I think it happened in Oregon and maybe one or two other places. So there's interesting political things going on to try and get people more access to it. But it is tricky because it's definitely could be, could cause bad effects, and there needs to be guidance and controls. And I think that's what regulators are going to have a trouble with, is how do we let people have this without people like having problems? And of course, originally this stuff was banned because of hippies and acid and deadheads and all that. Like, they thought that it was going to be really harmful to society, so they just outlawed it in the 70s and 60s, which is obviously a mistake. But now we're in this new day, but we have to be careful. So I'm following the politics. There was another situation recently where MDMA was rejected by one of the maybe it was the DEA or FDA. They were doing a clinical trial, and it didn't pass. And they spent a lot of time and money trying to get it there, but it wasn't controlled enough, apparently, the experiments or the clinical testing. So, we're getting there, but we still need the government to, allow it in a bigger way.
Ideally, I would like that. I take the long view. I think it, these will be adopted and properly regulated, or, safely regulated. I think that's probably, I think MDMA will go there. Psilocybin will go there. It'll happen over the next 5 to 10 years. We all want this to happen, as quickly as possible, but I'm more interested in having it available, for those who need it, and have it available conscientiously. And maybe the way this happens in the near term is where kind of ayahuasca, ended up, which is it is able to be done, I think maybe in certain states, maybe the whole country, I'm not sure really, in religious settings, right? So, and I know there are some organizations that are expressly religious or spiritual, and they're offering psilocybin, through that, under that auspice, as a sacrament, in their church, as ayahuasca, and I believe peyote, I think perhaps also falls under that. It's allowed use in that religious context. And obviously, as a spiritual teacher and a religious leader, that's entirely consistent for me. So that
Yeah.
would be in alignment, with the usage. And if that's where big journeys, are allowed under an auspice like that, then maybe that's okay.
I think it is okay, and I think it's also there's always two parts of the society. One is that like no way, that's you're crazy, and that's like you're gonna freak out or whatever. And then there's the other part, like yeah, bring it on. I want to give this a try. So I'm curious from your world of being a spiritual teacher and a Zen master. Do you ever get pushback? Has any other Zen teachers said, what are you doing with that, Paul? That's not cool, or are they more supportive and like go for it?
Well, it's definitely more the opposite. But I will say, when I started getting back into this, maybe 6-7 years ago, I was really worried about that. And, I'd read a book called Zigzag Zen, which was, I think it was 20 or more, maybe 30 years ago, it was put together, an anthology of spiritual teachers talking about psychedelics.
Oh,
And so there's maybe 20 or something essays in that, and they're all over the map, some very supportive, some very negative, some in between. I mean, all over the map. And that gave me a good, like, oh, this is great. So I got to figure this out myself. I didn't get back into psychedelics for another 15 years after that. And getting back into it, I was initially quite concerned, about how my lineage and how broader, spiritual Zen and spiritual communities would think about it. And I've come to be pleasantly surprised that people I thought would be casting a squinted glance have actually asked me about it, and even asked me to hook them up.
yeah, there you go. You should have like a Zen master, session with a bunch of really cool spiritual teachers, and that'd be fun.
And you know what? I'm close with some teachers, and we've shared experiences, and it's really to go back to, the simple benefits that I talked about at the beginning. We look at each other and we go, oh yeah, I see what's happening. It's like an intensified meditation experience in a lot of ways, and we kind of get it. And there's actually not that much to talk about.
It's great. It's great because then that's also normalizing it in a way too. It's almost as normal as sort of having a beer with a buddy too, in some ways. So I think it's interesting, and I don't mean to bring up alcohol right now, so sorry about that. But but no, I think it's like when you're around people that are spiritually inclined, and they're also into the plant medicine, and so I find a really strong connection to those type of people, like that are very open-minded about both sides of it, that meditate, that exercise a lot, but they also think that plant medicine opens up a different part of your brain. So I think between all this stuff that you're doing, and it's out there in the news, like more and more people are coming into the fold here, so to speak. And I think that's super positive.
It is positive. And, it does get at, when I coach someone through a microdosing protocol, or even more so in a macrodosing experience, I want to know what their community, how much support their community has, primarily their family and their partner has, for what they're doing. Right. Yeah. So are they going to go back, say, after a big journey, are they going to go back into a household that thinks they're crazy?
Right.
Or, right. That's not good. You want an alignment with the community. So that's kind of a cameo of what you're talking about, that the broader, the more and more community acceptance and understanding there is on this, the more it becomes a really powerful healing modality for our society as a whole, and for each of us individually.
And I also think, and I appreciate this conversation, Paul, because us just talking about it and being open and putting it out there, our experiences and our thoughts, I think that's important. And I feel comfortable doing it. Maybe a couple of years ago, I wouldn't be so comfortable putting all this out there. But now it's like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good thing for me. And I'm okay with putting it out there. And I found that the more people and more personal people in my life are asking me about it now, asking me can I hook them up? And they're getting benefit out of it. And I'm like, now, like, I don't know, I've been doing it for longer. So they're like, hey, Scott, what should we do? How much do we do? And what, And I kind of enjoy doing that, actually, like helping people along this journey. And I think that's something that you do a lot too.
Yeah, I was wondering, Scott, do you feel like your view on this, your conviction, your experience is different from what it was, I think, 3 months ago when we did our first episode?
I think so. I mean, it's constantly changing. Yes, it's just getting more. I'm more conviction. I'm definitely more positive about it. There's been more experiences that I've, worked in the psilocybin, and some not so happy times. I've had, and I've the psilocybin was part of those times too. And so I think that the longer that it goes, the more I still read a lot. I always encourage people, follow the news, read. There's a lot of information out there about what's going on. And I think that, so my views are constantly evolving, and the industry is as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I found the same thing is much more confident and convicted.
Yeah. And so, we are definitely going to take up this subject again in a couple months, and I'm sure it'll change some more. But Paul, what else do you want to leave our listeners with in terms of things that you might be able to do out there, or things that people should investigate for their own journey?
Yeah, I would encourage people who are intrigued by these potentials to give it a try. And I am available for, coaching in both microdose protocols and big journeys. So reach out. Yeah, the links are here around the podcast, and you can set up a session with me, and we can just talk about whether I can help you with a course of action, with the medicines. And I do recommend that you work with somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yes. And I'm really glad, Paul, that you and I have kind of worked this into our relationship, just talking about it. I really enjoy speaking with you about it. And, we talked for about a year or two before we ever brought up psychedelics, I guess.
That's right.
And now, now we're both kind of going along this path, and I really appreciate it. You're a great teacher, and the way you work in the mindfulness and meditation and Zen lessons with this is fascinating to me.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of bringing me into the conversation and talking about it and giving us, this forum to share it.
Yes, and thank you, listeners, for allowing us this time. We appreciate it. Of course, check out zenatwork.org. Contact Paul on LinkedIn. Get some coaching advice, and we'd love to have you listen in again. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back soon with a new episode. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration into Zen Buddhism and its transformative influence on work and life. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. May your journey be one of continuous growth and mindful living. From all of us here at Game of Zen, wishing you peace and prosperity on your path ahead.